Chapter 1. The Hidden Truth About Leadership. Most people believe leadership starts when others follow them. That's wrong. Leadership starts the moment you realize something uncomfortable. Your mind has been leading your life without your permission. Think about the last time you reacted before thinking. The last time your tone shifted because you felt attacked. The last time you made a decision you regretted within hours. In each of those moments, who was really leading? Not you. Your emotions were leading. Your impulses were leading. Your conditioned patterns were leading. And you were simply along for the ride. 3 years ago, I sat across from a CEO who had just lost his entire engineering team in 1 week. 7 people. Gone. He looked at me and said, "I don't understand. I had the vision. I had the strategy. Why did they leave?" I asked him one question. When was the last time you lost your temper in a meeting? He went silent for 11 seconds. Then he said, Tuesday and Thursday and last Monday. He didn't lose them because his strategy was wrong. He lost them because they never knew which version of him would show up. Here's a question most people never ask themselves. If you cannot control what happens inside your own mind, how can you possibly expect to lead anyone else? Leadership doesn't begin when others follow you. It begins when you stop being ruled by your own thoughts, your own emotions, your own impulses. Before anyone listens to your words, they feel your state. Before anyone trusts your direction, they sense your control. And before you ever lead people, you are already leading something far more difficult. Your thoughts, your emotions, your reactions, your standards. This is the part of leadership no one talks about. Not the speeches, not the titles, not the authority given from the outside, but the quiet, invisible work of self-command. Because here is a truth that rarely gets said clearly. You can have intelligence without leadership. You can have confidence without leadership. You can even have power without leadership, but you cannot lead anyone consistently, calmly, or sustainably if you cannot lead yourself. Every breakdown in leadership begins internally, not with a bad decision, but with a moment of lost control, a reaction instead of a response, an emotion that went unchecked, a standard that was compromised, a moment where comfort was chosen over discipline. And once that happens, authority starts to leak. People may not say anything, they may not confront you, but they feel it. Leadership is not what you claim, it's what your presence communicates when you say nothing at all. Over the next hour, we're going to strip leadership down to its core. Not what looks good on the outside, but what actually holds when pressure shows up. You're going to learn why self-control is the first form of leadership, why mastering your emotions matters more than expressing them, why discipline outperforms motivation every single time, why standards, not titles, create authority, and why clarity inside the mind always comes before confidence in the world. Here's what we won't do. We won't talk about vision boards. We won't talk about positive thinking. We won't pretend that motivation is the answer, because motivation is emotional energy, and emotional energy runs out. What we're building here is structure. Structure that holds when your energy doesn't. This is not about becoming louder. It's about becoming steadier. It's not about proving anything. It's about removing the need to. Because the strongest leaders are not the most reactive. They are the most regulated. They do not rush to speak. They do not rush to defend. They do not rush to explain. They move with intention. They act from standards. And they lead first internally. By the end of this audiobook, you won't be handed a title. You won't be given authority. But you will have something far more valuable. A framework for leading yourself when no one is watching. A way to remain grounded under pressure, and a standard you can return to again and again when the world gets loud. Because before you lead a team, before you lead a family,
Before you lead a business or a vision, you must lead yourself. And that is where we begin.
Chapter 2. Why your emotions have been leading your life. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. When was the last time your emotions made a decision for you? When was the last time anger chose your words before you could stop them? When was the last time fear said no to an opportunity you actually wanted? When was the last time frustration burned a relationship it took months to build? Be honest with yourself right now. Don't answer in generalities. Picture the specific moment, the face of the person on the receiving end, the feeling in your chest right after. Hold that image for a second, because that's not just a memory, that's data. And data is what we're going to use. If you're honest, you already know the answer. Emotions are powerful, but power without direction is dangerous. And for most people, emotions haven't been something they manage. Emotions have been something that manages them. Here's what psychologists call this: emotional reactivity. It's the gap between stimulus and response where most people lose control. Something happens, you feel something, and before conscious thought can intervene, behavior leaks out. A sharp tone, a defensive posture, a rushed decision, a door slammed metaphorically or literally. The problem isn't that you feel emotion. The problem is that emotion has been making decisions on your behalf without your permission. Stanford researchers found something fascinating. When people pause for just 3 seconds before responding to an emotional trigger, they're perceived as 34% more competent. Not because they're smarter, because the pause signals control, and control signals leadership. 3 seconds, that's all it takes to change how people see you. Leadership does not require you to eliminate emotion. That's impossible. It requires you to stop letting emotion decide. Every day, emotions rise automatically. Anger, frustration, anxiety, excitement, doubt. They appear before logic, before reason, before intention. If you follow them blindly, they will decide your tone, your timing, and your actions. And once that happens, leadership is no longer in your hands. This is why emotional mastery is not optional for leaders. It's essential. Uncontrolled emotion creates inconsistency, and inconsistency destroys trust. People can adapt to strict leaders. They can adapt to demanding leaders. They can even adapt to difficult leaders. But they cannot adapt to unpredictable ones. When emotions run the show, behavior becomes unstable. One day calm, the next reactive. One moment reasonable, the next impulsive. And people begin to walk on eggshells. That's not leadership. That's emotional management forced onto others. Real leadership begins when emotions are felt but not obeyed. There's a difference between feeling anger and acting from it, between noticing fear and surrendering to it, between experiencing pressure and becoming it. Emotion is a signal, not a command. The problem isn't the emotion itself. The problem is identification. When you say, "I am angry," you fuse with the emotion. When you say, "Anger is present," you regain distance. That distance is power. Because the moment you create space between yourself and emotion, choice returns, and choice is the core of leadership. The Stoics called this the inner citadel, the part of you that remains untouched while the world burns around you. Marcus Aurelius wrote about it while leading an empire through plague and war. Seneca trained for it while advising a tyrant who would eventually order his death. This isn't self-help. This is ancient technology. And it works because human psychology hasn't changed in 2,000 years. Leaders do not react faster. They react later, after clarity replaces impulse. This is where emotional mastery actually lives, not in suppression, not in expression, but in regulation. Regulation means you allow the emotion to exist without allowing it to control behavior. You don't deny it, you don't dramatize it, you observe it. And observation changes everything. When you observe an emotion, it loses authority. When you obey it, it gains control. This is why calm leaders feel powerful,
not because they lack emotion, but because they're not owned by it. Their calm isn't passivity, it's command. Calm under pressure communicates something profound. I am not overwhelmed. I am not rushed. I am not threatened. And people respond to that energy instinctively. Emotional mastery also determines how much damage you do or prevent during critical moments. One emotional outburst can undo months of credibility. One uncontrolled reaction can fracture trust permanently. One impulsive decision can create consequences that outlive the moment. Leaders understand this. They know that the highest leverage moments require the lowest emotional volatility. This is why silence is often the strongest response. Silence gives emotion time to burn off. It gives clarity time to surface. It prevents regret. You don't lose authority by pausing, you gain it, because pause signals control. When pressure is high and emotions spike, most people feel an urgency to act immediately, to say something, to fix something, to defend themselves. Leaders resist that urge. They slow down when others speed up. They lower their voice when others raise theirs. They choose restraint when others choose release. And that contrast is felt immediately. Emotional mastery also begins internally long before others are involved. It starts with noticing your patterns. What triggers you? What consistently pulls you off center? Where do you lose objectivity? These patterns aren't weaknesses, they're data. And data allows you to prepare instead of react. When you know your emotional patterns, you stop being surprised by them. And when you're not surprised, you're not controlled. So, here's the practice. Simple but demanding. Notice emotion without obeying it. Pause before responding. Lower intensity before making decisions. Choose clarity over release. Each time you do this, you reinforce authority inside yourself first. And slowly, something changes. You feel less reactive, more grounded, more deliberate. You stop being pushed around by internal storms. And when the internal stabilizes, the external follows. Chapter 3. The mistake that destroys authority instantly. There's one mistake that destroys leadership authority faster than any other. It's not lack of vision. It's not poor strategy. It's not even bad decision-making. The fastest way to lose authority is to be unpredictable. I want you to think of a leader you've worked with who kept you off balance, the one you had to read the room before approaching, the one whose mood determined whether your idea would be heard or destroyed. What did that feel like in your body? That slight tension when you saw their name on your calendar? That hesitation before speaking? That's the cost of unpredictability, and it's a cost others pay, not the leader. Think about the leaders you've trusted most in your life. Not the ones who impressed you with their intelligence, not the ones who motivated you with their speeches. The ones you actually trusted. What did they have in common? They were consistent. You knew what to expect from them. You knew how they'd respond under pressure. You knew where they stood. That predictability wasn't boring. It was grounding. It created safety. And safety is the foundation of trust. Now think about the leaders you struggled to follow, the ones who kept you off balance, the ones who changed direction based on mood, the ones who were warm one day and cold the next. What did that feel like? Exhausting, unsettling, unreliable. Here's what psychologists call this: affective unpredictability. When someone's emotional state fluctuates widely, the people around them never fully relax. They're always scanning, always adjusting, always trying to predict what comes next. And that scanning consumes mental energy that should be going toward performance. This is the hidden cost of emotional inconsistency. It doesn't just affect you. It affects everyone who has to work around you. A leader who cannot regulate themselves forces others to regulate around them. A leader who can regulate themselves creates space for others to perform. This is why self-control isn't passive. It's active leadership. Every time you hold your center, you're not just managing yourself. You're stabilizing the entire environment. But here's what most people get wrong about consistency. They think it means being rigid. It doesn't. Consistency means being principled. It means your behavior flows from standards, not from moods. Standards are stable, moods are not. When you operate from standards, you can adapt without becoming unstable. You can adjust tactics without abandoning principles. You can listen without losing direction. That balance is what creates reliable leadership. The mistake most leaders make is treating emotional expression as authenticity. They think if they show every feeling, every frustration, every reaction, they're being real. But here's the truth they miss. Unregulated expression isn't authenticity. It's abandonment. You're abandoning your people to your moods. You're abandoning your judgment to your impulses. You're abandoning your authority to whatever emotion happens to be loudest in the moment. Real authenticity includes restraint. It includes choosing what to share and when. It includes protecting your people from your worst moments so they can benefit from your best ones. Think about a surgeon in the middle of an operation. If they expressed every emotion they felt, what would happen? If they shouted when frustrated, if they panicked when something went wrong, if they froze when pressure mounted, people would die. The surgeon feels those emotions, they just don't obey them. Leadership is the same. You will feel frustration, you will feel anger, you will feel fear. The question isn't whether you feel them, the question is whether you let them decide. Here's a question I want you to sit with. Not answer immediately. Sit with it. Are you predictable in the ways that matter? Do your people know what you stand for? Do they know how you'll respond? Or do they brace themselves before walking into your office? If you're not sure, watch how they act around you tomorrow. Do they hesitate? Do they check your mood before engaging? Do they approach carefully? Those are signals, and they're telling you something important. There's a reason people trust steady leaders more than intense ones. Intensity is exciting in the moment, but it's exhausting over time. Steadiness is unexciting in the moment, but it's grounding over time. And grounding is what allows people to focus, to perform, to grow. So here's the hard question. Are you predictable in the ways that matter? Do people know what you stand for? Do they know how you'll respond? Do they feel safe bringing you bad news, or do they brace themselves? If you're not sure, watch how people act around you tomorrow. Do they hesitate? Do they check your mood before speaking? Do they approach carefully? Those are signals, and they're telling you something important. The mistake that destroys authority isn't losing your temper once. It's being so inconsistent that people never know which version of you they'll get. Leaders who understand this protect their consistency like it's their most valuable asset, because in many ways, it is.
Chapter 4. Why intelligent people still sabotage themselves. Here's a puzzle that confuses most people. Why do intelligent people still fail at leadership? Why do talented professionals still self-destruct? Why do capable individuals still make decisions they know are wrong? The answer isn't lack of intelligence, it's lack of self-control. Intelligence helps you see what's right. Self-control helps you do what's right, and those are two completely different capacities. You can know exactly what you should do and still not do it. You can understand the consequences of losing your temper and still lose it. You can recognize that a decision is emotional and still make it. Knowing isn't the same as doing, and in leadership, doing is what matters. I worked with a founder once, brilliant guy, Ivy League education, could raise millions on a phone call, but his team couldn't stand him. Not because he was mean, because he was chaotic. He'd have brilliant insights in the morning and abandon them by afternoon. He'd make promises when he felt inspired and forget them when pressure hit. His intelligence was never the problem, his self-control was. And intelligence without self-control isn't leadership, it's just noise.
Psychologists call this the executive function gap. Your prefrontal cortex, the reasoning part of your brain, can identify the right choice, but under pressure, the emotional centers of your brain can override it. That override happens fast, faster than conscious thought. By the time you realize what's happening, the damage is already done. This is why self-control isn't about willpower in the moment, it's about training before the moment. Because when pressure hits, you don't rise to your intentions, you fall to your level of training. Think about that for a second. Every reaction you have under pressure isn't a choice you're making in real time. It's a pattern you've already trained. If you've trained yourself to pause before responding, you'll pause. If you've trained yourself to react immediately, you'll react. Pressure doesn't create behavior, it reveals it. This is why intelligent people still sabotage themselves. They rely on their intelligence in the moment instead of training their responses beforehand. They think they'll figure it out when the time comes, but when the time comes, there's no time to figure anything out. There's only time to execute whatever pattern is already installed. The most dangerous belief in leadership is, "I'll handle it when it happens." No, you won't. You'll handle it the way you've trained yourself to handle it. And if you haven't trained, you'll handle it poorly. So what does training self-control actually look like? It looks like practicing pause, deliberately, consistently. Not just in big moments, but in small ones. When someone says something annoying and you want to react immediately, you pause. When you feel frustration rising and you want to speak, you pause. When an email triggers you and you want to fire back, you pause. Each pause is a rep. Each rep strengthens the neural pathway that says, "Stop before act." Over time, that pathway becomes faster, more automatic, and eventually, pause becomes your default. It also looks like practicing discomfort. Self-control is essentially the ability to tolerate discomfort without escaping into reaction. Every time you want to react and you don't, you're teaching your nervous system that discomfort is survivable. Every time you sit with an emotion instead of expressing it, you're building capacity. This is why disciplined people seem calm under pressure. They aren't calm because nothing bothers them. They're calm because they've trained themselves to stay present when things bother them. They've built tolerance. Here's what else intelligence misses. Self-control is exhaustible. Psychologists call this ego depletion. Every act of self-control draws from a limited resource. Use it too much without recovery, and you'll run out. That's when smart people do dumb things. Not because they forgot what's right, but because their self-control reserves are empty. This is why leaders must protect their energy, not just for productivity, but for self-control. When you're tired, hungry, or stressed, your ability to regulate yourself drops. And when that drops, your intelligence stops mattering because your impulses take over. The most intelligent decision in the world means nothing if you can't execute it, and you can't execute it if you've depleted your self-control. So here's what this means for you. Intelligence is not enough. Talent is not enough. Knowledge is not enough. Without self-control, they're just potential that never becomes actual. They're ideas that never become actions. They're insights that never become change. The people who rise in leadership aren't always the smartest in the room. They're the ones who can execute what they know. They're the ones who can stay regulated when others lose control. They're the ones whose behavior matches their understanding. That's what self-control gives you. Not just the ability to know what's right, but the ability to do it.
Chapter 5. The difference between reacting and responding. Reaction is automatic. Response is intentional. That single difference separates leaders from followers. Reaction happens fast. It's emotional. It's driven by habit, fear, ego, or urgency. It requires no thought, no pause, no deliberation. It just spills out. And once it spills, you can't take it back. Response takes a moment longer, but in that moment, leadership is born. Most damage in leadership doesn't come from bad intentions. It comes from fast reactions under pressure. A sharp reply, a defensive tone, a rush decision, a premature conclusion. None of these come from clarity. They come from reactivity. Leadership requires something rarer, the ability to pause. That pause isn't weakness, it isn't hesitation, it's control. When you pause, you interrupt the automatic cycle. You stop emotion from turning into behavior without permission, and that interruption changes outcomes. Let me give you a concrete example. A few years ago, I watched two leaders handle the exact same situation. An employee made a mistake that cost the company $20,000. Leader 1 called them in immediately, raised his voice, asked, "How could you be so careless?" The employee shut down, defended, withdrew. Trust eroded. Leader 2 waited, not days, just hours, let the emotions settle, called the employee in and said, "Walk me through what happened." The employee explained. They fixed the system. No trust lost. Same mistake, same cost, completely different outcomes. The only difference? Timing. Leader 2 didn't react faster, they reacted later. Reacting feels productive because it releases tension. Responding feels uncomfortable because it requires restraint. But relief isn't leadership, direction is. Leaders choose direction over relief. Reaction seeks to discharge emotion. Response seeks to resolve the situation. This is why reacting often creates more problems than it solves. It escalates conflict, it spreads tension, it creates consequences that outlast the original trigger. Responding does the opposite. It lowers intensity, it clarifies intent, it keeps authority intact. This difference is felt immediately by others. People can sense when a leader is reacting, this urgency, defensiveness, excess energy. They can also sense when a leader is responding, this calm, deliberation, grounded presence. That presence changes the room. It signals stability, and stability is one of the strongest forms of leadership there is. Leaders who react quickly often believe they're being decisive, but decisiveness without clarity is just speed. Speed doesn't equal leadership. Timing does. Responding allows timing to enter the equation. It gives you space to consider impact, to weigh consequences, to choose words instead of spilling them. Words spoken in reaction are difficult to take back. Actions taken in reaction are difficult to undo. Leaders understand this. They know that one controlled response can prevent weeks of repair. This is why restraint isn't passive, it's preventative. Responding also preserves dignity. When you react, you're pulled into the emotional field of the moment. You lose altitude. You fight on the same level. When you respond, you stay above it. You don't deny the emotion, you simply refuse to be dragged by it. That refusal communicates strength, not force, not dominance, strength. People follow those who remain composed when tension rises, because composure signals capacity. If you can manage yourself, people trust you to manage situations. This is especially important in moments of disagreement. Disagreement is inevitable, conflict is unavoidable, but escalation is optional. Reactive leaders escalate unintentionally. They take things personally, they defend their ego, they interpret challenges as threats. Responsive leaders listen first, not because they agree, but because understanding precedes resolution. Listening slows the situation down. It removes assumptions. It creates space. That space allows better decisions to emerge. Responding also protects focus. Reaction scatters attention. It pulls you into side battles. It drains energy. Response conserves energy. It keeps attention on what actually matters. Leaders who react constantly become exhausted. They're always putting out fires, always addressing symptoms. Leaders who respond strategically address causes. They ask, what's really happening here? What matters most right now? What outcome am I aiming for? These questions can't be asked in reaction. They require pause, and pause requires discipline. Responding also changes how you experience pressure. Pressure feels overwhelming when you believe you must act immediately. When everything feels urgent, nothing is prioritized. Response introduces hierarchy.
It allows you to distinguish between what's urgent and what's important, between noise and signal, between emotion and reality. This distinction is critical. Leaders who react treat everything as a crisis. Leaders who respond know that most things aren't. They conserve urgency for moments that truly require it. That conservation builds credibility. When you finally do act decisively, people listen because they know you're not reacting out of impulse. They know your actions are considered. Responding also means accepting that not everything needs a response. Silence is sometimes the best response. Not avoidance, not suppression, strategic silence. Silence allows emotions to settle. It prevents escalation. It creates reflection. Leaders who are comfortable with silence are rarely reactive. They don't rush to fill space. They don't rush to defend themselves. They don't rush to control perception. They understand that presence speaks louder than immediacy. This comfort with silence comes from internal stability. If you're uncomfortable internally, silence feels threatening. If you're grounded, silence feels neutral. Over time, people learn that emotional outbursts don't move you, that pressure doesn't rush you, that provocation doesn't control you. That learning changes behavior around you. People communicate more clearly, they escalate less, they prepare better, because your response pattern shapes the environment. Leadership isn't only about how you act. It's about what your actions train others to expect. Reaction trains chaos. Response trains order. Order creates efficiency. Efficiency creates results. Responding also reshapes your internal experience. You feel less drained, less regretful, less reactive. You experience pressure without being consumed by it. This internal calm compounds over time. You become harder to destabilize, more centered, more deliberate. And that internal state becomes your leadership signature. Not aggression, not speed, not volume, but composure. Composure under pressure is rare, and rarity creates influence. This is why responding isn't a technique, it's an identity. You become someone who responds, someone who chooses timing, someone who values outcome over release, someone who leads moments instead of being carried by them.
Chapter 6. What most people mistake for confidence. Most people misunderstand confidence. They think it's something you feel first and then act from. They think it's an emotion, a state, something that comes and goes based on circumstances. But in leadership, confidence is rarely an emotion. It's a byproduct, and the source of that byproduct is clarity. When your mind is clear, your actions are steady. When your actions are steady, confidence follows naturally. Not loud confidence, not performative confidence, but quiet certainty. Clarity is knowing what matters and what doesn't. It's understanding direction without needing constant reassurance. It's being able to move forward without explaining every step. Leaders who lack clarity often try to compensate with intensity. They speak more, they move faster, they project certainty they don't actually feel. But intensity can't replace clarity, and over time, people sense the difference. Unclear leaders feel restless. They overthink, they hesitate, they change direction frequently, not because they're incapable, but because their internal landscape is noisy. Noise destroys confidence. When the mind is crowded, decisions feel heavier than they need to be. Every option competes for attention. Every outcome feels equally risky. This creates either paralysis or impulsive action meant to escape discomfort. Neither is leadership. Clarity removes that weight. When you're clear, decisions simplify, not because they're easier, but because they're aligned. Alignment reduces friction. You no longer ask, "What should I do?" You ask, "What's the next aligned action?" That question changes everything. Clarity also stabilizes communication. A clear leader speaks with precision. They don't ramble. They don't over-explain. They don't hedge every statement. They say what needs to be said and stop. This brevity isn't arrogance. It's confidence rooted in understanding. People trust clarity. When instructions are clear, people feel secure. When expectations are clear,
people perform better. When direction is clear, people commit more fully. Unclear direction creates anxiety. Anxiety erodes performance. Performance issues then get mislabeled as motivation problems. But the issue was never motivation, it was clarity. Clarity also affects how you handle uncertainty. Leadership doesn't mean having all the answers. It means knowing which questions matter. A clear leader doesn't pretend certainty where none exists. They acknowledge what's unknown without losing direction. This balance is critical. Pretending certainty creates fragility. Acknowledging uncertainty while maintaining direction creates trust. People don't expect leaders to be omniscient. They expect them to be grounded. Grounded leaders know their priorities. They know their values. They know their non-negotiables. And when those are clear, uncertainty doesn't destabilize them. Clarity also prevents emotional hijacking. When you're unclear, emotions fill the gap. Fear exaggerates risks. Doubt magnifies obstacles. External opinions gain too much influence. Clarity acts as a filter. It allows you to hear input without being swayed by it, to consider feedback without surrendering direction, to adapt without losing identity. This is one of the most important leadership skills there is. Clear leaders are flexible without being unstable. They can adjust tactics without abandoning principles. They can listen without losing conviction. That balance is rare, and it comes from clarity. Clarity isn't a one-time achievement. It's a discipline. You must regularly remove mental clutter, unnecessary commitments, conflicting priorities, unexamined beliefs. Mental clutter creates hesitation. Hesitation erodes confidence. This is why leaders who try to do everything struggle to lead anything. Focus is a function of clarity. When everything matters, nothing does. Clear leaders are selective. They choose fewer priorities and commit deeply. This selectivity isn't limitation, it's leverage. By saying no more often, their yes carries weight. Clarity also sharpens self-trust. When you understand why you're doing something, resistance weakens. When you know your direction, external doubt loses power. You stop needing validation. You stop needing constant confirmation. That independence is confidence. Not emotional bravado, but internal alignment. Alignment between values and actions, between intention and behavior, between long-term vision and daily decisions. When alignment is present, confidence feels calm. You're not trying to convince anyone. You're simply moving forward. Clarity also reveals where you're undisciplined. Confusion often hides avoidance. If you feel unclear about something important, ask yourself, is the issue lack of information or lack of commitment? Many people seek clarity as a way to delay action. They want certainty before moving. Leaders understand that clarity often comes after commitment. You move, you observe, you adjust. Action refines clarity. Waiting rarely does. This doesn't mean acting recklessly. It means acting deliberately with the best information available. Perfection isn't clarity. It's avoidance dressed as precision. Clear leaders accept incomplete information. They make decisions anyway, and they take responsibility for the outcome. Responsibility strengthens confidence. Avoidance weakens it. Clarity also strengthens boundaries. When you're clear about your priorities, distractions become obvious. When you're clear about your standards, compromises become visible. You no longer negotiate with everything that demands attention. This conserves energy. Energy conservation is critical for leadership. Burned-out leaders lose clarity first, then patience, then discipline. Clear leaders protect their energy by protecting their focus. They don't overconsume information. They don't entertain unnecessary conflict. They don't react to every signal. They choose what deserves attention. That choice is clarity in action. Clarity also changes how others perceive you. People feel secure around clear leaders. They know where they stand. They know what's expected. This reduces tension, and reduced tension allows collaboration. Unclear leaders create anxiety, not because they're bad, but because ambiguity is stressful. Clear leaders remove that stress. They create environments where people can focus on execution instead of guessing. That's leadership at scale. Confidence built on clarity doesn't fluctuate wildly. It doesn't depend on praise. It doesn't collapse under criticism. It remains steady, not because the leader feels fearless, but because they know what they're doing and why. This is the kind of confidence people trust. Not loud, not aggressive, not defensive, just grounded.
Chapter 7. The quiet force that separates those who lead from those who follow. There's a quiet force that separates those who lead from those who follow. It's not intelligence. It's not talent. It's not even confidence. It's discipline. Discipline isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't depend on how you feel when you wake up. And that's exactly why it works. Motivation is emotional energy. It rises and falls. It responds to comfort, excitement, and external validation. Discipline is different. Discipline is structure. It's commitment without negotiation. Leadership can't be built on something that disappears the moment pressure appears, and pressure always appears. This is why discipline outlasts motivation every single time. Motivation feels powerful in the beginning. It creates momentum. It creates excitement. It creates the illusion of change. But motivation is reactive. It needs conditions to be right. Discipline doesn't. Discipline functions when conditions are wrong, when energy is low, when confidence is quiet, when no one is watching. That's where leadership is actually formed. A disciplined leader doesn't ask, "Do I feel like it?" They ask, "What needs to be done?" And then they do it. Not perfectly, not heroically, but consistently. Consistency is what separates discipline from intensity. Intensity is impressive for a moment. Consistency is impressive over time. Leadership isn't proven in bursts. It's proven in patterns. Here's what most people don't understand about discipline. They think it's about grinding, about pushing through pain, about heroic effort. It's not. Real discipline is boring. It's showing up when showing up doesn't matter. It's making the call when no one would notice if you didn't. It's keeping your standard when lowering it would be easier and undetectable. The person you become in those invisible moments, that's who you actually are. Everything else is performance. This is why disciplined leaders feel reliable. You know what to expect from them. You know they'll show up. You know they'll follow through. Not because they're superhuman, but because they don't depend on emotion to act. Discipline also creates internal trust. When you repeatedly do what you said you would do, something subtle changes. You begin to trust yourself. This self-trust is quiet, but it's powerful. It removes hesitation. It reduces internal conflict. It stabilizes decision-making. A leader who trusts themselves doesn't second-guess every move. They move forward with clarity, even when outcomes are uncertain. Without discipline, self-trust erodes. You start making promises you don't keep. You start negotiating with your own standards. You start explaining instead of executing. And slowly, confidence becomes performative instead of grounded. Discipline reverses that. It replaces internal noise with internal order. This is why discipline isn't restrictive, it's liberating. When your actions are governed by discipline, you stop wasting energy on internal debates. You stop bargaining with discomfort. You stop needing constant reassurance. You simply act, and action creates clarity. Many people believe clarity comes first, then action follows. In reality, disciplined action often creates clarity. You don't wait to feel ready, you move, and readiness catches up. This is one of the hardest truths for people to accept, because discipline requires doing things before you want to, before you feel confident, before you feel inspired. But leadership demands that exact capability. A leader can't wait for ideal emotional conditions. Decisions still need to be made. Standards still need to be upheld. Direction still needs to be given.
Discipline ensures that leadership doesn't collapse during emotional droughts. It also sets the tone for everyone around you. When people see that you operate from standards instead of moods, something shifts. They stop trying to manage your emotions. They stop guessing where you stand. They start aligning with your consistency. This reduces friction, it increases trust, and it creates psychological safety. People perform better under disciplined leadership, not because it's softer, but because it's predictable. Predictability creates stability. Stability allows focus. Focus produces results. Discipline also sharpens judgment. When you're undisciplined, you tend to overreact. You compensate. You swing between extremes. When you're disciplined, you respond proportionally. You conserve energy. You make cleaner decisions. This is because discipline trains patience. Patience isn't waiting passively. It's the ability to hold your ground without forcing outcomes. Leaders who lack patience rush decisions. They seek relief instead of resolution. They confuse urgency with importance. Discipline slows that down. It teaches you to act deliberately, to choose timing instead of speed, to value alignment over appearance. This is especially important under pressure. Pressure exposes habits, it doesn't create them. When pressure hits, you don't rise to your potential, you fall to your level of discipline. This is why disciplined leaders remain effective in chaos. They aren't improvising, they're executing patterns they've already trained. Those patterns might look simple from the outside, but simplicity is the result of refinement. Discipline removes excess. It removes unnecessary reactions, unnecessary words, unnecessary movement. What remains is precision. Precision is another form of authority. People trust leaders who move precisely, who speak deliberately, who act without wasted motion. Discipline also requires boundaries. You can't be disciplined if everything is optional. You can't lead if your standards are flexible under discomfort. Discipline means deciding in advance what you won't negotiate, your schedule, your commitments, your non-negotiables. When those are clear, decisions become easier. You no longer ask, should I? You ask, does this align? Alignment replaces debate. This is how leaders conserve energy. They reduce choice by increasing standards, and that conservation matters. Leadership is demanding. If you waste energy on indecision and inconsistency, you'll have nothing left for what matters. Discipline protects your energy. It directs it instead of dispersing it. Over time, discipline reshapes identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries. You start seeing yourself as someone who does. That identity shift is powerful because identity drives behavior more than intention ever will. Once discipline becomes who you are, leadership becomes natural, not forced, not performative, not exhausting, just steady. This doesn't mean discipline is easy. It means it's worth the effort. There will be days when discipline feels heavy, when resistance is loud, when shortcuts look tempting. Those moments aren't signs of failure, they're moments of leadership training. Each time you choose discipline over comfort, you reinforce authority inside yourself first. And that internal authority always shows externally. Because people can sense when your actions are anchored, when your direction is stable, when your leadership isn't dependent on mood. Discipline makes that possible. It's the invisible structure holding everything together.
Chapter 8. Why titles mean nothing and standards mean everything. Authority does not come from what you're called. It comes from what you consistently uphold. Titles can be given, positions can be assigned, but authority is earned, and it's earned through standards. Standards are the rules you live by when no one is enforcing them. They're the lines you don't cross, even when crossing them would be easier. They're the expectations you place on yourself before you place them on anyone else. Without standards, leadership becomes hollow. You can give direction, but it won't carry weight. You can make decisions, but they won't inspire confidence. You can hold a role, but you won't command respect.
Because people don't follow words, they follow consistency. Standards create that consistency. A leader with weak standards sends mixed signals. One day something matters, the next day it doesn't. One moment discipline is enforced, the next moment it's ignored. That inconsistency erodes trust faster than any mistake ever could. People don't need perfection from a leader, but they do need predictability. Standards make behavior predictable. They tell people what you tolerate and what you don't. They clarify what's acceptable and what isn't. They remove ambiguity. And ambiguity is the enemy of authority. When standards are unclear, people test boundaries, not out of malice, but out of uncertainty. They're trying to understand where the line is. If the line moves, authority weakens. This is why standards must be internal before they're external. You can't expect discipline from others if you excuse yourself. You can't demand focus if you tolerate distraction. You can't enforce accountability if you constantly renegotiate your own commitments. Leadership begins with self-imposed standards. What time you wake up, how you speak under pressure, what you finish even when motivation fades, what behavior you don't justify. These details may seem small, but leadership is built from small, repeated signals. Let me tell you about someone I studied. Not a famous CEO, a middle manager at a company I consulted for. No impressive title, no corner office, but when he spoke, people listened. When he set a deadline, people met it. When he gave feedback, people actually changed. I wanted to understand why, so I watched him for a week. Here's what I noticed. He showed up at the same time every day, not early, not late, exactly when he said he would. He responded to emails within 4 hours every time. He never raised his voice, even under provocation. He never made excuses. His authority didn't come from his title, it came from his predictability. People trusted him because they could count on him, and that trust was stronger than any position could create. Every time you hold your standard, you send a message, first to yourself, then to others. That message is simple. This matters. And when enough things matter consistently, authority forms. Authority isn't loud. It doesn't need to explain itself. It's felt. People sense when a leader has standards because there's alignment. Words match behavior, decisions match values, expectations match actions. This alignment creates confidence. Not emotional confidence, structural confidence, the kind that holds under stress. Standards also protect leaders from emotional decision-making. When standards are clear, you don't decide in the moment, you follow what you've already decided. This removes pressure. Instead of asking, "What should I do right now?" you ask, "What is the standard here?" Standards simplify leadership. They reduce complexity. They reduce negotiation. They reduce internal conflict, and they reduce the likelihood of regret. Many leadership failures happen not because people didn't know better, but because they abandoned their standards under pressure. Pressure reveals standards. It doesn't create them. If your standards disappear when things get difficult, they were never standards. They were preferences. Preferences change. Standards don't. This distinction matters. Leaders who operate on preferences feel unstable to others. Leaders who operate on standards feel grounded. Grounded leaders create trust. Trust allows people to relax, and when people relax, they perform better. Standards also shape culture. Whether you intend to or not, people mirror what you allow. If you allow lateness, you teach lateness. If you allow excuses, you teach excuses. If you allow inconsistency, you normalize it. Culture isn't what you say, it's what you tolerate. This is why strong leaders are often misunderstood. From the outside, they may seem strict, reserved, uncompromising, but what they're actually doing is protecting clarity. They're removing confusion. They're reducing friction. They're creating an environment where expectations are clear. Clarity is kindness in leadership. Unclear standards force people to guess. Clear standards free people to focus. Standards also require courage. It's easier to bend a rule than to enforce it. It's easier to avoid discomfort than to uphold consistency. It's easier to explain than to maintain a boundary. But every time you bend a standard to avoid tension, you pay for it later with authority. Short-term comfort often creates long-term instability. Leaders with strong standards accept short-term discomfort to protect long-term trust. They're willing to be misunderstood briefly rather than ineffective permanently. This isn't rigidity, it's responsibility. Standards should be firm but not arbitrary. They should be grounded in purpose, not ego, not control, not image. Standards exist to support performance, integrity, and direction. When standards serve those ends, people respect them, even if they resist at first. Over time, resistance fades because consistency teaches. People adapt to what doesn't change. This is why leaders who constantly adjust to please others lose authority. They teach people that pressure works, that persistence will be rewarded with compromise. Leaders who hold standards teach a different lesson. They teach reliability. They teach fairness. They teach that expectations apply equally. Nothing undermines authority faster than double standards. When rules apply to some but not others, trust collapses. When exceptions are frequent, credibility disappears. Strong leaders aren't harsher on others, they're harsher on themselves. They hold themselves to the same or higher standards. This creates moral authority. Moral authority is stronger than positional authority. People may obey a title, but they respect integrity. Standards are the visible expression of integrity. They show that you live by something beyond convenience, and that's why people follow. Not because they have to, but because they want to. Standards also stabilize identity. When your standards are clear, you don't reinvent yourself daily. You don't shift based on mood or approval. You know who you are. That stability is grounding. It reduces anxiety. It reduces overthinking. It reduces the need for validation. You don't ask, was that okay? You ask, did that align? Alignment replaces insecurity. This internal alignment is what makes leadership sustainable. Without it, leadership becomes exhausting. You're constantly adjusting, explaining, correcting. With it, leadership becomes simpler, not easier, but cleaner. Standards do the heavy lifting. They guide behavior when emotions rise. They anchor decisions when clarity fades. They protect authority when pressure intensifies. And over time, they define you. Not by what you say, but by what you never compromise. That's why authority isn't granted by titles. It's built through standards.
Chapter 9. The one thing that builds trust faster than anything else. Trust isn't built through intensity. It's built through repetition. People don't trust what you say once. They trust what you do again and again. This is why consistency is one of the most powerful and underestimated forces in leadership. A leader can be talented and still untrusted, charismatic and still unreliable, visionary and still destabilizing, because talent without consistency creates uncertainty, and uncertainty erodes trust. Consistency is what turns potential into credibility. When your actions align over time, people stop questioning your direction. They stop bracing for change. They stop preparing for unpredictability. They relax. And when people relax, they focus. Focus is where performance lives. Consistency begins internally. Before others trust you, you must trust yourself. Self-trust isn't a feeling, it's an outcome. It's earned by keeping promises you make to yourself, by following through when no one is checking, by acting the same in private as you do in public. When you break commitments to yourself, something weakens, not visibly, but structurally. You hesitate more, you second-guess decisions, you look outward for reassurance. Inconsistency creates internal noise. That noise shows up externally. A leader who doesn't trust themselves compensates. They over-explain, they seek approval, they change direction frequently, not because they're incapable, but because their internal foundation is unstable.
Consistency stabilizes that foundation. Every time you follow through, you reinforce identity. You become someone who does what they say. That identity is powerful. It reduces friction, it simplifies decisions, it strengthens resolve. Consistency also removes emotional dependency. When you act consistently, you stop relying on motivation to move. You move because it's who you are. This frees you from mood-driven behavior. Mood is unpredictable. Identity isn't. Leaders who operate from identity feel steady even when circumstances aren't. This steadiness is contagious. People mirror consistency. When leadership is erratic, people become defensive. They hedge. They protect themselves. When leadership is consistent, people align. They know what to expect. They know where the line is. They know how decisions will be made. This predictability isn't boring, it's grounding. Grounded environments produce better results than volatile ones. Consistency also creates fairness. When rules are applied evenly, trust increases. When expectations are stable, resentment decreases. Nothing destroys morale faster than inconsistency. One person is held accountable, another is excused. One standard applies today, another tomorrow. This breeds cynicism. Consistent leaders avoid this trap. They apply standards regardless of convenience, regardless of personal preference, regardless of pressure. This doesn't mean rigidity, it means integrity. Integrity is consistency between values and behavior. People respect integrity even when they disagree with decisions because they sense coherence. Consistency also protects leaders from burnout. Constant adjustment is exhausting. Reinvention is draining. When you're consistent, you do less emotional labor. You're not constantly recalibrating your stance. You're not negotiating with every situation. You operate from a stable center. That stability conserves energy. Energy conservation is critical for leadership longevity. Burned-out leaders become reactive. Reactive leaders become inconsistent. Consistency breaks that cycle. It keeps leadership sustainable. Consistency also sharpens judgment. When behavior is patterned, deviations stand out. You notice when something truly requires attention. Without consistency, everything feels urgent. With consistency, signal separates from noise. This clarity improves decision-making. You stop chasing short-term fixes. You commit to long-term direction. That commitment builds momentum. Momentum built on consistency is quiet but powerful. It doesn't spike and crash, it compounds over time. Small, consistent actions create massive impact. This is true internally and externally. Internally, consistency builds self-respect. Externally, it builds credibility. Both matter. A leader who lacks self-respect eventually loses external respect. A leader who has self-respect radiates confidence without effort. Consistency also trains discipline. Each time you repeat aligned behavior, resistance weakens. What was once difficult becomes automatic. This automation frees cognitive space. You no longer debate basic standards. You no longer question foundational actions. They're simply how you operate. This allows you to focus on higher-level leadership challenges, strategy, vision, direction. Without consistency, leaders get stuck managing basics. Consistency elevates leadership capacity. It also reduces emotional volatility. When actions are predictable, emotions stabilize. You're not constantly dealing with regret or cleanup or repair. You experience fewer emotional spikes because fewer mistakes are made impulsively. This emotional stability reinforces earlier principles. Self-control becomes easier. Emotional mastery becomes natural. Discipline becomes identity. Standards hold. Clarity remains intact. Responses replace reactions. Consistency ties everything together. It's the thread running through all effective leadership. Without it, principles remain theory. With it, principles become behavior. Consistency also changes how others engage with you. People prepare more. They communicate more clearly. They respect boundaries because they know inconsistency won't rescue them. This accountability improves performance. It also improves relationships. Consistent leaders are easier to work with even when they're demanding. People value fairness more than comfort. Consistency provides fairness. It also builds long-term influence. Influence built on charisma fades. Influence built on consistency endures. Charisma may attract attention. Consistency retains it. This is why quiet leaders often have the deepest impact. They aren't impressive in moments. They're reliable over time. Time reveals leadership. Consistency passes that test. There's also a deeper layer. Consistency aligns you with reality. Reality rewards what's repeated, not what's attempted once. Leadership is subject to the same rule. What you do occasionally doesn't define you. What you do consistently does. This truth is uncomfortable, but it's also liberating because it means leadership is accessible. It isn't about rare moments of brilliance. It's about ordinary moments handled the same way again and again. That's within control. Consistency returns power to daily choices, small choices, repeated choices, often unnoticed choices. Those choices build trust, first in yourself, then in others. And once trust is established, leadership no longer needs enforcement. People follow willingly because trust removes friction, and friction is the enemy of progress. Consistency removes friction. It smooths movement. It stabilizes direction. It strengthens influence.
Chapter 10: How to Become Unshakable Under Pressure. Pressure reveals who you really are, not who you want to be, not who you pretend to be, who you actually are. When things fall apart, when expectations rise, when stakes get high, your true level of leadership becomes visible. This is why becoming unshakable under pressure isn't optional, it's essential. But here's what most people get wrong about pressure. They think the goal is to eliminate it, to make it go away, to find a life with less stress, less demand, less weight. That's not leadership, that's avoidance. Pressure doesn't disappear when you become a leader. It multiplies. More responsibility means more pressure. More visibility means more pressure. More people depending on you means more pressure. The goal isn't to escape pressure. The goal is to become the kind of person pressure doesn't destabilize. So how do you become unshakable? It starts with acceptance. Not passive acceptance, strategic acceptance. You accept that pressure will come. You accept that things will go wrong. You accept that not everyone will be happy with your decisions. You accept that uncertainty is permanent. Acceptance removes the energy drain of wishing things were different. It stops you from fighting reality. And when you stop fighting reality, you can start navigating it. The people who crumble under pressure aren't weak. They're surprised. They expected smooth sailing. They expected cooperation. They expected fairness. When they didn't get it, they collapsed into frustration, resentment, or paralysis. The unshakable leader expected difficulty, so when it arrived, they were ready. Not emotionally ready, structurally ready. This is the second layer of becoming unshakable: structure. Pressure feels overwhelming when you don't have systems, when every decision is new, when every reaction requires fresh thought, when every moment demands invention. That's exhausting, and exhaustion leads to collapse. Structure removes that weight. Structure means you've already decided how you'll respond to certain situations. You've already set your standards. You've already trained your patterns. When pressure hits, you don't invent, you execute. This is why disciplined people seem calm under pressure. They're not calm because they're unfeeling. They're calm because they've already done the work. The decision is already made. The response is already practiced. Pressure just triggers the pattern. Think about emergency responders. When a crisis happens, they don't panic. They follow protocol. They've trained so extensively that action replaces reaction. Leadership under pressure works the same way. You need protocols for your mind, protocols for your emotions, protocols for your decisions. What's your protocol when someone attacks you personally? What's your protocol when a project fails? What's your protocol when you're exhausted but still need to lead? If you don't have answers to these questions, pressure will answer for you,
and you won't like the answer. The third layer is detachment. Not detachment from caring, detachment from outcome. This sounds contradictory. How can you lead without caring about outcomes? You can't, but you can care without being attached. Attachment says, this must happen or I'm a failure. Detachment says, I'll do everything I can and then I'll accept what comes. Attachment creates desperation. Desperation creates poor decisions. Poor decisions create worse outcomes. It's a cycle. Detachment breaks that cycle. It allows you to focus on what you can control, your effort, your standards, your response, and it releases what you can't control, results, opinions, circumstances. This is the paradox of unshakable leadership. The less you need a specific outcome, the better your chances of achieving it, because your mind stays clear, your decisions stay sharp, your presence stays steady. The fourth layer is perspective. Pressure always feels bigger up close. When you're in the middle of a difficult moment, it consumes your entire field of vision. Everything feels urgent. Everything feels permanent. Everything feels personal. Perspective is the ability to zoom out, to see this moment in context, to ask, will this matter in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years? Usually the answer is no, and when you realize that, the pressure loses some of its grip. This isn't about minimizing real challenges, it's about placing them correctly. Some things do matter, some moments are genuinely critical, but most aren't, and treating everything as critical is a recipe for burnout and instability. Unshakable leaders distinguish between what's urgent and what's important, between what's real and what's noise, between what demands a response and what can be ignored. This discernment comes from perspective, and perspective comes from stepping back regularly, from solitude, from reflection, from time away from the noise. The fifth layer is physical. You can't be mentally unshakable if you're physically depleted. Sleep matters, nutrition matters, movement matters. These aren't productivity tips, they're leadership requirements. A dysregulated nervous system cannot regulate anything else. When your body is in survival mode, your mind follows. This is why unshakable leaders protect their fundamentals. They don't negotiate sleep for more work. They don't replace meals with caffeine. They don't ignore the physical base that everything else rests on. They understand that leadership is embodied. You lead with your entire system. If that system is compromised, your leadership will be too. Becoming unshakable isn't about never feeling pressure. It's about building capacity. Capacity to hold pressure without breaking. Capacity to stay clear when others panic. Capacity to remain steady when everything shakes. That capacity is built slowly, through acceptance, through structure, through detachment, through perspective, through physical fundamentals. Each layer adds stability. Each layer makes you harder to destabilize. And over time, something shifts. You stop fearing pressure. You stop avoiding it. You stop hoping things will be easy. You know difficulty will come. You've trained for it. You're ready. Not because you're special, because you've done the work.
Chapter 11. The final principle that changes everything about leadership. There's one principle that changes everything about leadership. It's not self-control, though that's where it starts. It's not emotional mastery, though that's essential. It's not discipline, though that's the vehicle. It's not standards, though those are the foundation. The principle that changes everything is this. Leadership is not what you do, it's who you become. Most people approach leadership as a set of behaviors. They learn techniques, they practice strategies, they adopt tactics. And then they wonder why something still feels off, why people don't fully trust them, why their influence feels shallow. The answer is uncomfortable. People don't follow techniques, they follow identity. They don't trust what you do, they trust who you are. When leadership is just behavior, it requires constant effort. You have to remember to act a certain way. You have to monitor yourself. You have to perform. And performance is exhausting. More importantly, performance is transparent. People can sense when you're acting. They can feel when behavior isn't aligned with identity. But when leadership becomes identity, everything changes.
You don't have to remember to be disciplined. You are disciplined. You don't have to force yourself to stay calm. You are calm. You don't have to practice self-control. Self-control is simply how you operate. This shift from behavior to identity is the final threshold of leadership. And it's not achieved through trying harder, it's achieved through repetition, through acting as if until acting is as if no longer applies. Psychologists call this self-perception theory. You believe what you observe yourself doing. If you consistently act with discipline, you begin to see yourself as disciplined. If you consistently respond instead of react, you begin to see yourself as composed. Your behavior shapes your identity. Your identity then shapes your behavior automatically. It becomes a cycle. This is why consistency is so powerful, not just for what it produces externally, but for what it creates internally. Every time you hold a standard, you're not just making a decision, you're becoming someone. Every time you choose discipline over comfort, you're not just building a habit, you're building an identity. Think about someone you know who leads naturally, not perfectly, not effortlessly in every moment, but naturally. Their leadership doesn't feel performed, it feels like an expression of who they are. That's the goal. Not to become a perfect leader, to become someone for whom leadership is natural. I had a mentor once who embodied this. He wasn't the smartest person in any room, he wasn't the most charismatic, but when he walked in, things settled, people listened, decisions got made. Not because he tried to lead, because he had become someone worth following. That's the distinction. The people who lead effortlessly aren't trying hard, they're being who they are. Their actions flow from identity instead of intention. This doesn't mean leadership is easy for them, it means the friction is gone. They're not fighting themselves while trying to lead others. Think about someone you know who leads naturally, not perfectly, not effortlessly in every moment, but naturally. Their leadership doesn't feel performed, it feels like an expression of who they are. That's the goal. Not to become a perfect leader, to become someone for whom leadership is natural. This is also why self-leadership comes before leading others. You can't become someone who leads naturally if you're still fighting yourself, if you're still inconsistent, if you're still reactive. The internal conflict will always show externally. People will sense the gap between who you're trying to be and who you actually are. Closing that gap is the work of self-leadership. It's aligning your behavior with your values until they're indistinguishable. It's repeating standards until they become reflexes. It's training responses until they become instincts. When that alignment happens, something shifts. You stop wondering how to lead, you just lead. Not because you have all the answers, but because you're no longer in your own way. This is the final principle. Leadership isn't something you do, it's something you become. And becoming takes time, it takes repetition, it takes failure and recovery. It takes holding standards when no one is watching. It takes choosing discipline when comfort is available. It takes responding when reaction would be easier. Each choice is a brick. Each brick builds the structure of who you are. Over time, the structure becomes solid. It becomes reliable. It becomes something people can depend on. Not because you're trying to be dependable, because you are dependable. This is what people respond to. Not effort, not intention, not good intentions, but being. When your presence communicates stability without trying, people trust it. When your decisions reflect values without explanation, people respect them. When your actions align with words without effort, people follow. Not because you've convinced them, because you've become someone worth following. And this is where earlier principles converge. Self-control creates the foundation. Emotional mastery stabilizes the structure. Discipline builds the habits. Standards set the boundaries. Clarity provides direction. Response replaces reaction. Consistency reinforces identity. Each principle feeds into the next. Each layer supports the one above. And together, they transform leadership from something you attempt into something you are. This transformation isn't dramatic. It doesn't happen in a moment of insight or inspiration. It happens quietly, in small choices, in repeated actions, in days when no one is watching, in moments when only you know what you chose. But over time, those small choices accumulate. They become patterns. Patterns become habits. Habits become identity. identity becomes leadership. Not leadership you perform, leadership you embody. And that changes everything.
Chapter 12. What it really means to lead yourself first.
Before you lead a team, you must lead yourself. Before you lead a family, you must lead yourself. Before you lead a business, a movement, a vision, you must lead yourself. This phrase gets repeated often, but what does it actually mean? What does it look like to lead yourself first? It means your mood doesn't dictate your decisions. When you wake up feeling off, when energy is low, when motivation is absent, you still function. Not perfectly, not heroically, but consistently. You don't use your emotional state as an excuse to lower your standards. You lead yourself through the discomfort instead of surrendering to it. It means your impulses don't control your actions. When anger rises, you don't obey it. When frustration builds, you don't release it on whoever is nearby. When fear whispers reasons to stop, you don't automatically believe it. You observe the impulse, you let it exist, and then you choose. That choice is self-leadership. It means your standards aren't negotiable. You don't have one set of rules for when things are easy and another for when things are hard. You don't compromise your integrity for convenience. You don't bend your boundaries to avoid conflict. Your standards are your standards, not because someone is enforcing them, because you are. It means you finish what you start, not because it's fun, not because you feel like it, because you said you would. And what you say matters, even when no one else knows you said it, even when only you are watching. Self-leadership means your word to yourself is binding. It means you take responsibility without collapsing. When things go wrong, you don't waste energy on blame, not blaming others, not blaming circumstances, even not blaming yourself excessively. You acknowledge what happened, you learn what you can, you adjust, and you move forward. Responsibility without self-destruction. It means you protect your own mind. You don't consume endlessly. You don't let noise drown out clarity. You don't fill every moment with distraction. You create space. Space to think, space to reflect, space to recalibrate. Self-leadership requires solitude, not isolation, solitude. Time when no one is making demands so you can hear your own thoughts. It means you tell yourself the truth, not what you want to hear, not what feels comfortable, the truth. About your weaknesses, about your patterns, about where you're avoiding what needs to be done. Self-deception is the enemy of self-leadership. You can't lead someone you refuse to see clearly. It means you hold yourself accountable. No one is checking your consistency. No one is tracking your discipline. No one knows what you do when you're alone. That's the point. Self-leadership is what remains when external pressure is removed. It's who you are when no one would know if you slipped. This is harder than leading others. Leading others comes with visibility, with feedback, with consequences that show up immediately. Leading yourself is invisible. No one applauds when you choose discipline. No one notices when you hold your standard. No one rewards you for staying consistent when it would be easier to quit. But that invisibility is also its power, because self-leadership isn't for show, it's for structure. It's the internal architecture that supports everything else. When that architecture is weak, external success doesn't last. When it's strong, even failure becomes temporary. Think about any leader you admire who sustained success over decades. They didn't rely on motivation. They didn't depend on mood. They had internal systems, internal standards, internal accountability. They led themselves long before they led anyone else. I want you to do something right now. Ask yourself, what am I avoiding? What am I excusing? What standard am I lowering today that I'll regret tomorrow? Where am I letting myself off the hook? Don't answer in generalities. Name it. Say it internally, because what you tolerate in yourself, you eventually tolerate in others, and what you tolerate in others becomes your culture. This moment of honesty right now is self-leadership in action. This is what it means to lead yourself first, not as a slogan, as a daily practice, as a non-negotiable foundation. It means asking yourself hard questions. What am I avoiding? What am I excusing? What standard am I lowering today that I'll regret tomorrow? Where am I letting myself off the hook? These questions aren't comfortable, but they're necessary. Because what you tolerate in yourself, you eventually tolerate in others, and what you tolerate in others becomes your culture. Leading yourself first also means understanding your patterns. What triggers your reactivity? What situations consistently pull you off center? What time of day are you most vulnerable to poor decisions? These aren't weaknesses to eliminate, they're data to use. When you know your patterns, you can prepare for them. You can build systems that protect you from your own tendencies. This is self-leadership as design, not just willpower, not just trying harder, but designing your environment, your schedule, your commitments to support your best self. Removing friction from discipline, adding friction to impulses, making it easier to do what's right and harder to do what's wrong. Leading yourself first also means managing your energy, not just your time, your energy, knowing when to push and when to recover, knowing that self-control is a limited resource that must be replenished, knowing that exhaustion doesn't produce good leadership. Rest isn't laziness, it's maintenance. And finally, leading yourself first means accepting that it never ends. There's no finish line, no moment when you've mastered yourself completely, no point where self-leadership becomes automatic forever. It's daily, it's ongoing, it's the work of a lifetime. But that's not discouraging, it's clarifying. It means every day matters, every choice counts, every moment is an opportunity to reinforce who you're becoming. Because who you're becoming is the point, not just what you achieve, but who you are while achieving it. Not just the destination, but the person you become on the way. That's what it means to lead yourself first.
Chapter 13. The choice that determines everything about your leadership. There's a choice that determines everything about your leadership. It's not a choice you make once, it's a choice you make constantly, multiple times a day. In moments so small, they seem insignificant. The choice is simple. Will you act from impulse or from intention? That's it. That's the choice that separates leaders from followers. That's the fork in the road that determines everything else. Every time you feel the urge to react, you face this choice. Every time emotion rises and wants to speak through you, you face this choice. Every time discomfort appears and invites you to escape, you face this choice. Impulse or intention, reaction or response, release or restraint. Most people never realize they're making this choice. They think reaction just happens. They think emotion just spills out. They think they're victims of their impulses. They're not. They're just not paying attention. The pause between stimulus and response is always there. It's always available. It's just incredibly brief, milliseconds. But in those milliseconds, choice exists. And that choice, repeated thousands of times, shapes everything. Choose impulse and you reinforce reactivity. You strengthen the neural pathway that says, feel then act. You become more reactive over time. Your responses become faster, more automatic, less considered. Your leadership becomes unstable because you're not deciding, you're just releasing. Choose intention and you reinforce self-control. You strengthen the pathway that says,
Pause, then choose. You become more deliberate over time. Your responses become slower, more considered, more effective. Your leadership becomes stable because you're deciding instead of discharging. This is how character is built, not in grand moments of moral crisis, in small moments of impulse versus intention, when no one would blame you for reacting, when the reaction would be understandable, when everyone would excuse it. That's when the choice matters most, because that's when you're choosing who you are, not who it's easy to be. Think about the last time you held your tongue when you wanted to speak, the last time you stayed calm when you wanted to explode, the last time you did the hard thing when the easy thing was right there. Those weren't small moments, they were identity moments. Each one was a vote for the person you're becoming, and each vote counts. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. Intensity is one big vote. Consistency is thousands of small votes, and thousands of small votes will always outweigh one big vote. You can't become a disciplined person through one heroic act of willpower. You become disciplined through hundreds of choices to do the hard thing instead of the easy one. The choice between impulse and intention is also the choice between being led and leading. When you act on impulse, you're being led by your emotions, by your conditioning, by whatever is loudest in the moment. You're not leading, you're being led. When you act with intention, you're leading, you're choosing, you're directing. This is the deepest meaning of self-leadership, not controlling others, but choosing moment by moment who's in charge of you. Is it your emotions, your habits, your triggers, or is it you? The answer isn't determined once, it's determined constantly, in every moment of irritation, in every moment of fear, in every moment of frustration, in every moment when impulse rises and wants control. Will you hand it over, or will you lead? This choice determines everything, not just about your leadership, about your life, about who you become, about the person others experience when they're with you, about the legacy you leave in small moments and large ones. Because in the end, leadership isn't what you achieve, it's who you become in the process of achieving. And who you become is decided in the pause, in the milliseconds between stimulus and response, in the tiny space where choice lives. Most people never use that space. They rush through it. They react before they realize they had a choice. They live their whole lives on autopilot, wondering why they keep making the same mistakes, why they keep damaging the same relationships, why they keep undermining their own authority. They never understood that the answer was always there, in the pause, in the choice, in the moment between impulse and intention. That moment is always available. It's always yours, and it's always asking the same question. Will you act from impulse, or will you act with intention? The answer determines everything.
Chapter 14. Becoming the person others naturally want to follow. Leadership reaches its highest form when it no longer needs to convince. No persuasion, no pressure, no performance. People follow because of who you are, not because of what you demand. This is the point where leadership stops being something you do and becomes something you embody. At this level, influence isn't forced, it's felt. Presence replaces persuasion. People sense it before you speak. They notice it in how you enter a room, in how you listen, in how you remain composed when others are unsettled. This presence isn't charisma, it's coherence. Coherence between thought and action, between values and behavior, between words and silence. When these elements align, leadership becomes natural. People are drawn to stability. In a world of noise, urgency, and emotional volatility, calm authority stands out immediately, not because it demands attention, but because it doesn't need it. This is why true leaders rarely explain themselves excessively. Explanation often signals insecurity. Presence signals certainty. The more grounded you are internally, the less you feel compelled to justify externally. People trust that. They may not always agree, but they feel safe following. Because safety in leadership doesn't come from comfort, it comes from predictability, integrity, and restraint.
Becoming someone others want to follow doesn't require perfection. It requires congruence. You don't need to have all the answers. You need to be steady while searching for them. You don't need to be fearless. You need to be regulated in the presence of fear. You don't need to dominate. You need to remain centered when challenged. This centeredness is magnetic. It signals maturity. Immature leadership seeks control. Mature leadership holds space. Holding space means you don't collapse under emotion, yours or others. It means you can hear disagreement without taking it personally. It means you can maintain direction without rigidity. This balance is rare, and rarity creates influence. People follow those who make situations feel manageable, who reduce chaos instead of amplifying it, who simplify instead of complicating. This is why calm leaders are often underestimated at first. They don't posture, they don't rush, they don't assert dominance, but over time their steadiness becomes undeniable. When pressure hits, they remain composed. When conflict arises, they don't escalate. When uncertainty spreads, they ground the room. And people remember that. They remember who held their center when things were unstable. That memory creates loyalty. Leadership built this way doesn't rely on position. It survives loss of title. It survives change of environment because it's not tied to role, it's tied to character. Character is the ultimate leadership asset. It's what remains when authority is removed. Character is revealed in how you treat people when nothing is at stake, how you respond when you're not being observed, how you behave when silence would be easier than integrity. These moments define leadership far more than public wins. People may admire success, but they follow character. This is why leaders who chase image lose influence over time. Image requires constant maintenance. Character compounds quietly. Becoming someone others want to follow also means letting go of control. Control creates compliance, but compliance is fragile. It breaks when pressure increases or supervision disappears. Influence creates alignment. Alignment endures. Aligned people move in the same direction because they choose to, not because they're forced to. That choice is rooted in trust, and trust is earned through consistency, restraint, and fairness. This doesn't mean you become passive. It means your action comes from a different place, not from insecurity trying to prove itself, but from certainty that doesn't need to prove anything. You no longer try to lead. You simply lead by how you move through the world. Your actions are quieter now, more deliberate, more selective. You don't engage in unnecessary battles. You don't chase validation. You don't overextend. You choose carefully where to invest energy. This selectivity sharpens presence. People notice when your attention isn't scattered, when your words are few but precise, when your silence feels intentional. This intentionality creates gravity. People lean in, not because you're louder, because you're clearer. Becoming someone others want to follow also requires humility, not performative humility, but grounded self-awareness. You know your strengths, you acknowledge your limits, you take responsibility without collapsing into self-criticism. This balance builds respect. Arrogance repels, insecurity exhausts, grounded confidence attracts. It tells people, I know who I am, I know what I stand for, and I'm not threatened by challenge. That message is powerful. It frees others to show up honestly, to speak clearly, to take responsibility. Leadership multiplies at this level because you're no longer the center of everything. You're the anchor. Anchors don't move constantly, they hold. Holding creates stability. Stability allows growth. This is how leadership scales, not through control, through presence. Presence also requires solitude. Leaders who never sit with themselves lose clarity. They become reactive. They absorb too much noise. Strong leaders protect time alone, not to escape, to recalibrate. Solitude restores perspective. It sharpens standards. It quiets internal clutter. This inner work is invisible, but its effects are unmistakable. People feel when a leader is internally aligned. They feel it in decisions, in tone, in timing. Timing is especially important. Leaders who rush signal anxiety. Leaders who wait signal confidence. Waiting doesn't mean inaction, it means discernment. Knowing when to move and when not to is a hallmark of mature leadership. That discernment comes from deep familiarity with yourself. You know your triggers, your patterns, your tendencies, and because you know them, they no longer control you. This self-knowledge is freedom. It allows you to lead without being dragged by impulse. It allows you to stay true under pressure. It allows you to act from identity rather than reaction. At this point, leadership becomes quiet strength. Not intimidating, not theatrical, just solid. People trust solid things. They lean on them, they build around them, and eventually they follow them, not because they're told to, but because it makes sense. This is the ultimate form of leadership. Not dominance, not persuasion, not authority by force, but influence through being. You become the example, the reference point, the standard. And when that happens, leadership is no longer something you chase, it's something others recognize naturally, instinctively, without explanation. That's what it means to become the person others want to follow.
Chapter 15. The Quiet Authority. Leadership was never meant to be loud. It was never meant to be dramatic, and it was never meant to begin with others. It begins with you. Not with what you say, but with what you tolerate. Not with what you demand, but with what you practice. Not with how you appear, but with how you regulate yourself when no one is watching. Throughout this audiobook, one truth has repeated itself in different forms. Leadership is built from the inside out. You learned that self-control is the first form of leadership because without it, nothing holds. That emotional mastery is essential because emotions will always rise, but they don't need to decide. That discipline outlasts motivation because leadership can't depend on mood. That standards create authority because integrity is more powerful than titles. That clarity comes before confidence because direction stabilizes action. That responding is stronger than reacting because restraint preserves control. That consistency builds trust because repetition creates credibility. And finally, that real leadership emerges when you become someone others naturally want to follow. None of these principles are complex, but they are demanding. They ask you to stop outsourcing responsibility to circumstances, to stop blaming emotion for behavior, to stop waiting for confidence before acting. They ask you to lead yourself daily, quietly, repeatedly. This kind of leadership isn't rewarded immediately. It doesn't generate applause. It often goes unnoticed at first, but over time it compounds. People begin to feel your steadiness. They sense your restraint. They trust your direction even before you speak, and that trust changes everything. You stop needing to convince. You stop needing to explain. You stop needing to control outcomes aggressively because your presence does the work. Leadership becomes less effortful, not because you care less, but because you're no longer fighting yourself. You're aligned, and alignment is powerful. It allows you to move through pressure without being consumed by it, to face conflict without escalating it, to make decisions without second-guessing every step. It gives you the ability to remain calm when others rush, clear when others panic, steady when others fracture. That's not talent, that's training, and it's available to anyone willing to practice it. So here's the invitation, not as motivation, but as direction. Lead yourself in small moments, in how you pause before reacting, in how you keep promises to yourself, in how you uphold standards even when it would be easier not to, in how you choose clarity over noise, in how you respond instead of release, in how you act consistently, especially when no one is checking. These moments may feel insignificant. They are not. They are where leadership is forged. You don't need a title to begin. You don't need permission. You don't need an audience. You only need the willingness to take responsibility for your internal state and act accordingly. Because once you can lead yourself,
everything else changes. Your decisions sharpen, your relationships stabilize, your influence deepens, and leadership stops being something you chase. It becomes something others recognize quietly, naturally, without force. So remember this, especially when things feel uncertain, overwhelming, or chaotic. Before you lead a team, before you lead a family, before you lead a vision or a future, lead yourself first. Everything else follows.
If you've made it to this point, you're not just listening, you're training. You're one of the few willing to do the internal work that most people avoid. That's rare, and that's exactly who this channel is for. Here's what most people don't realize. Everything we covered today, self-control, emotional mastery, discipline, standards, it can be undone in one moment, one trigger, one pattern you don't see coming. In the next video, I'm going to show you the hidden psychological habits that quietly destroy leadership authority, the ones operating beneath your awareness, the ones that explain why smart leaders still self-sabotage. It's called the silent killers of authority, and it will change how you see yourself. If you value calm authority over loud leadership, if you're serious about mastering your mind before leading others, then subscribe. This is where disciplined minds are built, where leaders train before the world notices them. Also, comment below, which principle changed your thinking the most? Was it self-control, emotional mastery, standards, consistency? Let me know. I read the comments, and your input shapes what comes next. Set your reminder now. The next video drops in 48 hours, and in it, you'll discover why everything you've been taught about confidence might be keeping you small. Don't miss it. Until then, remember, leadership isn't what you claim, it's what your presence communicates when you say nothing at all. Lead yourself first. Everything else follows.